Welcome, everyone. This week I chose a provocative title for our class. The title of our lesson this week is When the Brightest of Jewish Scholars Get It Wrong. So I hope that piqued your interest. And when I say get it wrong, I'm not talking about explanations, commentaries, because there's no right and wrong when it comes to commentaries. But I'm talking about facts, measurable facts that you can actually say right or wrong. Because when it comes to commentaries, we can use other vocabulary, reasonable, far-fetched. This doesn't seem so plausible. I would be very hesitant to use right and wrong. I only use right and wrong when talking about something that you can measure that it's wrong. And my argument this week is that some of the brightest scholars got something wrong. So let's start with the opening of our parsha. Do you see the first verse of the parsha? Tetzaveh? Do you see the slide?
Yes.
So the parsha begins, ואתה תצווה את בני ישראל ויקחו אליך שמן זית זך כתית למאור להעלות נר תמיד. Do we have a volunteer to read the English?
Okay, you shall further instruct the Israelites to bring you clear oil of beaten olives for lighting, for kindling lamps regularly.
I have an issue with the lamps here. It's the menorah. It's the menorah that was in the tabernacle. I don't understand why they, but let's leave that alone. That's this particular translation. My question is, what's unusual about this opening verse?
Well, I've never beaten any olives.
Okay. Aside from that, maybe we're not farmers. We don't know we've lost the art of beating olives. But how is this opening different than most parshas? Than what you would expect?
You shall further instruct means that you did something before.
Oh.
And so it's sort of opening like, it's a hanging chad.
Ah, excellent.
But in Hebrew it doesn't say further. Right?
No, but it's ve'ata tetzaveh. Wait, it's ve. There's the vav there.
And okay. All
yeah.
Right.
So I agree with Natalie completely. Usually, a new subject is introduced by the very familiar God spoke to Moses saying, "Vayidaber Adonai Moshe lemor." So that is where this is very unusual. So that begs the question, well, why should it start with God spoke to Moses saying? And do we really need that opening line? Or can we just open this commandment to bring the oil with and you shall further instruct? So I'll give you a lawyerly answer. What do lawyers say? It depends. I think
rabbis.
And rabbis, yes, and rabbis. So what does it depend on? Well, if it's a totally new subject, yeah, I would expect something like this. God spoke to Moses saying, if you're going to completely change the subject, or if there wasn't a speech going on beforehand, right? If there was an event beforehand, and now suddenly there's a new revelation. So two options I can think of, or a totally new revelation. There was some event that happened, and now there's a revelation to Moses, or maybe there was already a continuing revelation. So we go to the parsha, and we see there was a continuing revelation. In other words, this is a continuation of the commandment to build the Mishkan and all the vessels. So I want to show it to you in the actual Chumash. So the parsha Teruma began the whole new section about the tabernacle, and then it continued with this week's parsha. So and of course, when it started the new theme, the new subject of the tabernacle, we do find Vaydaber Adonai el Moshe lemor. So let's see that inside. Here, Parsha Teruma begins, Vaydaber Adonai el Moshe lemor. Daber b'nei Israel, tell the Israelite people to bring me gifts and to build a sanctuary that I may dwell. And now all the details. The first one is the ark, then the table, then the cherubs. How do you say cherubs or cherubs?
Chair.
Cherubs in
Cherubs, the
English.
cherubim. Okay, then the table of the showbread, then something that is related to our parsha, the lampstand, the menorah. I don't like lampstand. I like menorah. Vasita menorat. Then the actual strips of cloth that make the walls that were made out of all these expensive yarns. Then the walls, which were made of acacia wood. Then the parochet. That's what we cover our ark, our ark with. We call it parochet, the thing that we move the curtain that we open up the ark. It's modeled on this curtain that they had in the tabernacle. Then the mizbeach, the altar. Okay, no Vaydaber Adonai Moshe lemor. It's one long commandment with lots and lots, hundreds of details. Then the courtyard, or they call it the enclosure in this JPS translation, Chatzer. Okay, we're getting to the end of Teruma. And Tetzaveh, Tetzaveh, you shall further instruct. So now I ask you, should there have been a Vaydaber Adonai Moshe lemor or not? Or do you think it's the same subject, or is it a totally new subject?
Seems like it's just a continuation.
Oh, I agree. So I want to show you all the themes that are in this week's parsha, and I think they're all a continuation of the last week's parsha. So there's really no need for Vaydaber Adonai el Moshe lemor. And here you see a summary of the contents. The first part we saw how to kindle the menorah. Israelites bring the oil, Aaron and the sons light it. Then a big section of the parsha is the priestly garments, the ephod, the choshen, the breastplate that had the 12 very special stones, very expensive stones, the mitznefet, the headdress, the frontlet, belts, tunics, the swords, etc. These are all worn by Aaron and his sons. Then part 3, description of the upcoming 7-day consecration ritual of the priests, Shivat Yemei HaMiluim. By the way, the reserve duty today in Israel is called Miluim. They took the word from here, and some say this is part of a general phenomenon of secularization of biblical terms, of holy terms. Because in the Tanakh, in Torah, Miluim is a very specific ritual ceremony dedicating, I almost said desecrating, dedicating the Mishkan. Okay, that's also a big part. And then a few short sections about the regular daily sacrifice and the incense altar. Now, I would argue these are all related. These are all one big subject related to the tabernacle and the priests. So the fact that, and so throughout the parsha, God is talking to Moses in the second person. Do you see the ata? Do you see? Why would Moses' name be mentioned? So when we say, where's Moses? The answer is, why should he be there at all? If God is talking about one theme and continually talking to Moses, then of course he wouldn't mention his name. That would only be a narrator describing some event, or maybe a narrator describing a new revelation on a totally different subject. So in fact, when we say that Moses' name is missing from our parsha, that language is a little bit biased. And I think we should sometimes, we don't even realize when we're using language that's biased when we interpret events or when we do commentaries or even political commentary. What do I mean by that? When you say missing, you're saying it should have been here, and now I want an explanation why it's not. But let's oh, okay, yeah, thank you. But let's use a more scientific neutral language. That would be Moses' name does not appear. So I prefer that. In other words, let's give an example in real life. A person who only sporadically comes to shul, and you see he's not in shul, so you tell your friend, what would you say? John Doe is missing, or John Doe was not in shul? I think you would say John Doe was not in shul. How about Rabbi Susan? He wasn't in shul last week. Yeah, because you're expecting him to be in shul. So you would say, hey, Bill, did you notice Rabbi Susan was missing on Shabbos? And Bill would say, yeah, because he visited his family in Denver. Then you would use missing because, yeah, you expect him to be there and he's missing. So we're going to see a lot of commentaries that use the inaccurate, I call it the inaccurate language, missing, when really I think we should be more neutral in the language and the terms that we use, because that also because that also affects how we interpret different facts. Okay, so if you accept, I think Gary is the one who said it, that really there's no need for Moses. It's one theme. God is continuously talking to him. It's a continuation of the previous parsha, and nowhere in the parsha there was a new subject that justified a new Vaydaber Adonai Moshe Lemo. If you accept all of that, then you would rephrase this and say, okay, his name is not there, but I don't see any reason to explain it. But many of our commentaries, and this is where it gets interesting, they did see it as something that's missing. They said, wow, Moses' name is missing from the whole parsha. Wow, why is that? So we go all the way back to the 12th century. Do you see the Rokeach, the slide about the Rokeach?
Yes.
Yeah. So we have a volunteer to read how the Rokeach explained the missing Moses.
Okay, the Rokeach explains the missing Moses. You shall further instruct. Why did the parsha not begin with Adonai spoke to Moses saying, but rather with you shall further instruct? Because originally Moses was supposed to be appointed a Kohen and Aaron was supposed to be a Levite. And when Moses resisted God's mission to represent the Israelites to Pharaoh, he became a Levite. Therefore, Moses is not mentioned at all in this parsha in which the priestly garments are discussed.
So a very interesting, colorful midrash. There's no textual basis for it, but apparently Moses was demoted.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one can look at it in a different way. One can look at it as maybe there's the seed of the idea of the separation of powers here. What, you want Moses to be the prophet, the leader, and the high priest? That's already too much power. But this midrash quoted by the Rokeach sees it as sort of a punishment that actually, yeah, Moses was to be the everything, and he got demoted or downgraded, and so not to rub it in, because this parsha does speak about all the privileges of the priests. So kind of, not to rub it in his face and say, you're the one who's supposed to get all these privileges, all these fancy clothes, and do all these services in the temple. So kind of they leave him outside out of respect for him. So a very
Also, Aaron gets promotion.
yeah, a promotion for Aaron. You can see it that way. Yeah,
I
maybe
think-
because he helped his brother. Remember, in Egypt, God gave him a secondary role, but he was happy to do it. Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
Shemai, I think that at least Gary and I would disagree that going from a Cohen to a Levite is a demotion.
Oh, no, of course.
Here, here.
Of course. It's all relative. It's all relative to your perspective. Okay. So now we'll go on to another, Vilna Gaon, one of the great sages, scholars of the 18th century. He ties it to the Jewish calendar. So he says, Tetzaveh most years is read during the week in which Adar 7 falls. What's special about Adar 7? This date here. What according to Midrash? Again, it's not in the Torah. What happened on that date?
Somebody's yard side.
Somebody very important. Anniversary
Yeah.
of Moses' death. Thank you, Charlie.
There you go.
So the Vilna Gaon says his name is missing. It's omitted from this parsha because to remind us of the loss, right? So he's not there. That's sort of the symbolic of the loss of the leader Moses. My issue with that is, the Torah took pains not to tell us where he's buried. Why are the rabbis trying to figure out when he died? The Torah is trying to discourage us from any kind of cult worship of personalities. So don't try to tell me. The Torah never says neither when he died nor where he was buried. So why are they trying to do it? That's number one. Number two, it doesn't happen every year. This year, for example, the 7th of Adar was last week. It was for parsha Teruma, so his explanation doesn't even work for every year. Okay, but nice idea that to tie it to the calendar, so to speak, the Torah reading calendar, that is. Now we go to something even more interesting. Rabbi Bachya ben Asher ibn Chalawa from the 13th century, nicknamed Rabbeinu Bachye, he says Moses brought it on himself. Moses got deleted because he himself asked for it. What do you mean he asked for it? So let's see what he's talking about. There was a sin of the golden calf. And Moses went up and God told him, the people have sinned, go down the mountain. I'm about to destroy all of them. What did Moses do?
He pleaded with God.
Exactly.
And
he pleaded with God, and there was a whole colloquy, and we're going to see just the very bare bones of that colloquy between Moses and God. So God says to Moses, hurry down, your people, they have acted basely, they have made themselves a molten calf. These are stiff-necked people, and that I may destroy them and make you a great nation. So Moses pleads with God. Let not your anger, Adonai, blaze forth against your people. Then he gives reasons. Don't do it. What the Egyptians will say. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So he's bringing up the merits of the forefathers. And God renounced the punishment. Then Moses comes down the mountain. What does he do? Famously, according to the movie, no, not just the movie, not just Charles Heston, right? He portrayed Moses. Yeah. He shattered them. Okay, but then after that, he did something very questionable. Actually, that I think should be condemned. He started a massacre. He said to the Levites, "Who wants to join me? Whoever is for Adonai, come here." And then he said to them, "Thus said Adonai, the God of Israel, each of you put sword on thigh, go back and forth from gate to gate throughout the camp, and slay sibling, neighbor, and kin." Wait a minute, excuse me, where did God say that? We just saw the colloquy. God did not say even something remotely similar to this. So Rashi, aware of this very difficult proposition, says, no. When Moses says God, Adonai, the God of Israel, said to do this massacre, it refers back to a law in Mishpatim that talks about whoever worships idols should be proscribed. That's in the covenant code. That's not a massacre. That's in a court of law. That's if somebody's suspected, like all the laws in the covenant collection. Like the law of the fighting men. You don't take the fighting men and execute them. You have a trial, and with the woman, the fighting men and the woman and the fetus, you have a trial. You give him the opportunity to defend himself, and then only after he's found guilty, then there's the two punishments. If only there was a miscarriage, or if harm was done, and then we had the whole discussion. What does that mean? So all the laws there are laws that are supposed to be adjudicated with proper, defenses that the accused shall have, with judges, with evidence. So you can't use that to justify this. So I think that to make this a living Torah, we have to call it out. It's a massacre, and this should not be condoned. This should be called out.
Doesn't idolatry
Other places.
always get capital punishment?
But capital punishment in a court of law. There was no court of law here. He massacred them. He went, the men of Levi did as Moses had bidden, and some 3,000 of people fell that day, and the next day he goes back to God. Don't tell me there were 3,000 trials in one day. This was a massacre, and God never said that, never condoned that, never gave him instructions to do that. he did this on his own, and then he made it up to make things even worse. He claimed that God said this to them, because otherwise, how would he get the Levites to do this massacre, right? He needs to make up this authority, right? Because I'm sure they were appalled. What do you mean? Just go around and start killing? What if there were onlookers who just came to look to see what's all this commotion? How are you going to tell who was actually participating in the worship, who was just an onlooker, who was just maybe people with mental disabilities? They didn't even know what they're doing there. So you're just going to go and slay people? So it's terrible what he did. I have no problem saying that.
But what about other places in the Torah? There are numerous other places where God does tell leaders to massacre.
Oh, so that's a different question. When he does tell them, we have to talk about that. But here, okay, that's a great question. And then we can say, okay, God doesn't speak to us anymore. So that's not, that cannot happen today. And then there's the theory that, God couldn't put 20th century morals on an ancient society that saw this as permissible. They would just reject everything. They would say, what do you mean? These morals are something so anathema. It would be like telling the ancient Israelites that it's not the sun that revolves around the earth, that it's the opposite. What do you mean? They all thought that the sun revolves around the earth. You can't put in the Torah something that the entire society believes is wrong. Okay, but here, my problem here is more acute because when I read the verses, Moses made this up. In other words, he falsely claimed that God told him to do this. I mean, he just had a colloquy with God. We can read it. We can read the whole conversation. There's nothing even remotely similar to. The only thing God did say was, "I will annihilate the people." That's different. Let God do. If God said that, if God will find those who sin and God will punish them. God never told you that you should take a sword and get all the Levites and start killing people right and left. So that's okay. But then, so after we condemn this part of Moses, we have to praise him for the next part that he did, which was to go back to God and said the following interesting thing. He said, Moses went back to Adonai and said, alas, these are the people who survived the carnage. I'm being a little sarcastic here, but okay. So, now he has mercy for those who survived it. Alas, these people are guilty of a great sin in making for themselves a god of gold. Now, if you will forgive their sin, well and good. But if not, erase me from the record which you have written. Erase me. So Moshe is asking to be erased from a record. What is that record? What does that mean? So we look at the Hebrew, misifrecha. Now, what is the usual translation of sefer?
Book.
Right.
Book. Yeah,
so we do have different translations.
Right?
I looked up, for example, the older JPS. You see, this is 2006. The older one from 1985 or here from 2009. Oh no, that's Mitsuda, or 1985 here. Erase me from the. They also have record. Okay, but I see in other translations book, and I always like to look at the Neve translation. Of course, we always look at Neve, the New International Version. So they have book and many of the non-Jewish translations. Now, why did JPS and also Everett Fox? I think because, well, what book could he be talking to? The Torah has not been written yet. So maybe there's some records. It's unclear what that is. But now let's see how the Rabbeinu Bachya, 13th century scholar, how he tied it in to why Moshe is missing from this week's parsha. So we already have a hint. Okay, maybe this is the book. So what does he say? He says, a midrashic approach. The word from your book, again, the JPS translated from your record, which Moses uttered here as simply a possibility, teaches that the curse of a Torah scholar, even if only conditional, is apt to come true. This is based on what Moses said here. Even though the essence of his prayer, namely that forgiveness of the sin of the Jewish people was accepted by God, Moses' name does not, and here's the crux of the matter, Moses' name does not appear in the entire portion of Tetzaveh as a direct consequence of his uttering the words, erase me from your book.
So he was.
So he was erased. So God had to choose one parsha to erase him, to erase his name, even though right? It was conditional. Moses didn't really mean that. He meant if you're going to follow through on your threat, in other words, destroy the entire Jewish people, then I don't want to be in your book. But God did not destroy the entire Jewish people. So you would think since the condition did not materialize, then he should not be erased. But this idea is that no, once a tzaddik, a righteous person makes some, utters words, they have force, they have power, even if logically speaking, you shouldn't have to act upon those words. So there has to be some consequence to Moshe saying the words, delete me from your book. So he's deleted from our parsha. So that also, but that begs the question, why Tetzaveh specifically? So God can choose any parsha and delete him from a parsha. Why this one?
Because it's about the priest, which Moses is not.
Yeah.
So that's certainly a very plausible explanation. This is the parsha
Maybe
focusing on Aaron and his sons and all the priestly work in the tabernacle. So it makes sense. If you're already going to choose one, then okay.
But
now,
can we back up one step there?
Yeah.
Did God ordain the parshas of the Torah? The Torah was not put,
No.
pen to ink, pen to paper until, maybe generations later and organized the way we see it today. Do we
Right.
believe that God gave it to Moses in these discrete pieces that we now use?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I think your point is excellent. And that's why I think the JPS did not want to translate your book. They said that's the whole idea of books of Chumash, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, etc. And then the Parshas came much, much, much later. How can Moses be referring to that? So they went with the word record to indicate maybe Moses is talking about some laws that God is intending to have him write down. And that's those, or maybe not even laws, records, maybe records as they go through the desert and their journey. And that's what Moses is telling God. If you're going to make sort of a diary of the journey here, I don't want to be in that diary if you're going to, follow through on your threat. So I think you're onto something here. That's why these new modern translations were very hesitant to use the word book, and they use the word, as we saw, record, from your record.
So there's another explanation which some people might interpret as heresy or apostasy or anything not so nice, and that has to do with biblical criticism that the parshiot were written or put together in different times in different political eras, and they reflect differences in what our people went through. And I'm not talking about Gentile biblical criticism. I'm talking about, in Judaics.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we
I don't
got
think that's
that
heresy.
way too.
Yeah.
Well,
So
some
how would
people
you
do.
tie that into the delete me from your book or from your record?
If I was a biblical criticism scholar, I would say that this was perhaps one of the factions in fairly ancient Israel that really didn't want to necessarily follow the teachings of Moses, more favored Aaron. I mean, all of that stuff happened. And the redactors put a lot of this stuff together, and they came from different places.
Right. So that's certainly possible. And
but Shammai, isn't perhaps the reason because this is such a terrible thing that Moses said, right? It's such a chutzpah thing to say to
Very.
God, isn't it?
to say what?
Yeah.
To say to God, well, if you don't do what I want, then just erase me from your.
Oh,
You know.
no, they see it as a heroic. I mean,
But he's talking to God, he
Yes,
said,
right.
You
That's
don't
my
play by my rules, I'm out of here. I'm
exactly right. Right.
Let's look at that verse. I never thought of it that way. That's interesting. He says, okay, Moses went back to God. Let's make it a little bigger. Moses went back to God and said, alas, this people is guilty of a great sin.
Okay.
And then now, if you will forgive their sin, well and good, but if not, erase me from the record which you have written. Then let's see the response of Adonai. But Adonai said to Moses, only one who has sinned against me will I erase from my record.
Meaning I'll play by your rules, Moshe. You were a good boy. You
Yeah.
get this.
So also this actually, yeah, this supports what you're saying, that it's totally not about Moses' name, because God is not deleting other people's names. God here, right? The deletion, the erase from record here kind of means will be eliminated from life, right? That or maybe it doesn't mean from my record. When God says no, I will only erase those who sinned. How do you understand that? He's not saying I'm going to delete them from the Torah. Most people are not mentioned in the Torah. Neither
It's his entire book of life, the one that we talk about on Yom Kippur.
Oh, that's a great comment, a great point that you make. Some commentaries say that. They say this Sefer has nothing to do with the Torah. This that Moshe is mentioning here, Misifrecha, it's the book of life. Yes, Orach Chaim says that. Commentary called Orach Chaim. And also Rashbam, I think, and some even the Pshat commentaries, they see this as this is not reference at all to the Torah or to parshas. No, this is the figurative book of life. A very good point. So we're going to have to stop here and continue our journey next week, because it's already time for Mariv. So I'm going to keep you in suspense as to what's the big mistake where the scholars got it wrong. Up until now, it was different ideas, but next week we're going to get to the point where I'm going to show you some very, very learned scholars got something wrong.
Great.